Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Delighted to have Michael Daly, Group CEO of KMD Brands, with us for this next session. Michael, welcome. We've had a busy day hearing various companies, omni-channel, online only, consumer discretionary, consumer non-discretionary. So keen to hear about KMD Brands. Some people will have obviously heard of and know the old Kathmandu holdings. Maybe you can just 9-10 months into the Group CEO role, you can give us a bit of background on where the company's at, how it's thinking about growth, and how that, I guess, is reflective in the change from Kathmandu Holdings to KMD Brands.
Yeah, no worries, Ron, and thanks for having me today. Look, at KMD Brands, we really felt it was important over the last few months to separate the Kathmandu brand from our overall parent company of KMD Brands, because where we are today, we're no longer just an Australian, New Zealand retailer with the Kathmandu brand like we once were a couple of years ago. With the acquisitions of Oboz, a footwear hiking shoe company in the US, and more recently of Rip Curl some 2 years ago, the nature of the company has really changed. And really the change in the company name was just an overt example of that change that is undergoing at KMD Brands. And we really look forward in the future we see ourselves as a leading family of outdoor brands. That's our focus as we go into the future. So currently we have 3 iconic brands with Kathmandu, Rip Curl and Oboz. And as we move forward, we're really looking to potentially add to that portfolio down the track. And we definitely think that the existing brands that we have that I've mentioned have got a good growth trajectory, not only in terms of geographies, but also in channels. We really see ourselves as a multi-channel operator across both retail, where we think bricks and mortar stores have a very important part to play, but also online and wholesale. So we really think as we move forward, we see the brands, chasing growth, not only geography-wise, but also channel-wise as well.
So maybe we can talk about each brand, and then we can take a bit more of a group perspective, and I'll try to keep it within the next 26 minutes or so. But we'll start with Rip Curl. And pardon the pun, but obviously there's been an increased swell of people going to the beach and surfing. And, how's that translating in terms of a sustainable underpinning to the growth, as opposed to some sectors in the consumer discretionary market where, COVID's brought forward demand, but that demand isn't sustainable now that we're getting out of COVID. How do you think about that in terms of Rip Curl?
Yeah, well, Rip Curl is a brand that is very much part of the DNA, particularly in Australia. It's a very well-known brand, and one of those rare Australian created brands that have made that, I guess, transition to a truly global brand. And the Rip Curl business has sizable businesses in all parts of the world, inclusive of North America, Europe, South America, and Asia. Indeed, Rip Curl has more sales offshore than it does in Australia these days, which is great and really part of being a global brand. What we've seen through the pandemic, and indeed prior to the pandemic, the number of participants in surfing in particular was continuing to rise. And what we saw through the pandemic, that is really the pandemic just even turbocharged that participation rate. And that was really on the back of probably a combination of more people working, having a little bit more flexibility in their working environment, being able to work from home a little bit, as well as just an ongoing focus on that, I guess, sea change, for lack of a better word, that inspiration for people to get out of the cities and really live a coastal or regional lifestyle. And certainly from my point of view, and certainly from internally at Rip Curl, we see both of those fundamentals continuing to be strong in the future, meaning that we think that the nature of work has changed, probably for the better, where people will have that increased flexibility. If they don't have the meetings, they can go out for a quick surf in the morning and then jump online during the day. So we think that flexibility continues, and we see no change in that push towards coastal living. And being a resident of that's down in the Surf Coast in Victoria. We certainly see that not only in property prices, but just in the number of people that we see out and about in the streets, but also, most importantly, out and about in the water. And that is true of Victoria, but that is equally true of different parts of Australia, right through to North America and Europe. So we think that the fundamentals for the sport of surfing are really strong. And some of the more recent professional surfing events that have been some of the biggest events in terms of eyeballs that they've had in the long term. And on top of that, we think that Rip Curl definitely appeals to an active outdoor consumer who wants to go on beach holidays as well. So you don't necessarily have to be a core surfer to enjoy Rip Curl products. People that just want to get out in the water, go for a swim, sit on the beach, those people also are participating with Rip Curl. And again, with the pandemic, we've seen as people come out of lockdowns, they want to get out, they want to go on their beach holidays, which gives us really strong confidence for the growth for Rip Curl as we move forward.
So when you think about, so terrific in terms of underlying consumer demand and awareness of the brand and demand for the product, sorry. And, you know, when my 10-year-old did little nippers over the summer, we went down to Mordialloc Rip Curl to buy himself a new wetsuit because he needed one because unfortunately the water's a bit too cold in Melbourne, even in summer. But, you know, so Rip Curl just came straight to mind when we were thinking about stuff for him to take into the surf. There's a perception that Rip Curl is like number 3 globally, or top 3 globally in all the markets, just because obviously we are in Australia. Rip Curl is in Australia at that sort of level. Can you give us a sense of other markets Rip Curl's in and the sort of the inherent market opportunity on the basis that, you know, Rip Curl is not a mature business in a lot of the markets it's in? There's still heaps of market growth to come.
Yeah, look, prior to my most recent role, Ron, I was a long-term executive in the Rip Curl team, including CEO and COO, so certainly very well placed to give you a very detailed rundown by geography, and I've spent a lot of days in places like Brazil and California and southwest of Europe and so forth. But yeah, in terms of the Rip Curl brand, we've got really good penetration in most key markets. You know, the big call out, I would say, is North America. We've been operating in North America, you know, based out of California, but with stores in California, Hawaii, Florida. We've been based there for probably the best part of 25 to 30 years, but it is one of those regions that we really took a long time to really crack that market. It's really only in the last 10 years that we've started to get some good traction in that market. And I would say, you know, 10 years ago, we were barely in the conversation of a top 10 surf brand in the US market, which was very, you know, confusing and very challenging for us over a long period of time. But certainly pleased to report over the last 10 years, we've really made some really good traction. And we probably sit as a number 5 or number 6 surf brand in that market. Whereas in pretty much all other markets of the world, we would sit quite clearly as either a number 1 or 2 or 3 in those markets. So North America is definitely a strong opportunity for the Rip Curl brand. The other territory I would call out for ongoing growth for Rip Curl is probably Asia. We have strong businesses in places like Thailand and Indonesia, particularly on the back of holidaying tourists to Bali and places like Phuket, which have not necessarily been too lucrative in more recent times because of the pandemic. But certainly as those regions come back online with increased travellers, but also that Northern Asian market, which is a huge market, as we know, between Japan and China. You know, we have very small representation in those markets as well. So we think that with time and over a longer term play, we can certainly look to tap those markets as well. So North America, I think more in the short to medium term, and beyond that, Northern Asia, are clear opportunities for the Rip Curl brand.
You called out with the last result a supply shortage in neoprene that affected wetsuits, and clearly that's, you know, the largest category for Rip Curl and a key technical product that Rip Curl is known for. Was that a Rip Curl specific or industry specific?
Just to clarify one part, wetsuits are significant to Rip Curl, particularly from a brand perspective, you know, because of the importance of surfing. But certainly if we looked at it by category, it's an important category, but certainly we probably do a lot more volume and actually broader apparel than we do wetsuits. You know, wetsuits, core wetsuit, made of neoprene, we're talking only, you know, low double digits in terms of percentage of sales, you know, 10 to 15%, something like that. But yeah, with respect to neoprene, yeah, that's definitely it's a global shortage. It's a global shortage of the input that goes into making neoprene, which is also used for everything from car manufacturing to wetsuit manufacturing and that as well. So that's the biggest challenge, and we've been scouring the world for appropriate neoprene, but that input that goes into making neoprene is just hard to come by at the moment. So we're getting that from all the neoprene makers, and it's going to be one that's probably going to be a challenge we face over the next 12 to 18 months until some of those supply constraints ease up.
Maybe we can also have one further question on rip curl, and it might be a good segue into Kathmandu. One of the rationales for the acquisition by the old Kathmandu holdings of Rip Curl was, diversity of seasons, diversity of geographies, but also the ability for the two brands to do things together to help each other grow without diluting the brand itself. Can you give us a bit of a sense of some of the things that you've put into place and the things that you're executing on the kind of one brand helping the other brand to grow, whether it's into a market or a new product or something like that?
Yeah, look. First of all, just to add to that diversification, what we saw in our first half result, we saw it through the pandemic, albeit Kathmandu's had some challenges with its heavy concentration on ANZ and the lockdowns we've had in these territories. The underlying Rip Curl results have been very resilient, and that access to other markets gives Rip Curl sales and earnings some really strong resilience. And I've certainly seen that at Rip Curl for over 20 years. But with respect to the brands coming together, there's multiple aspects to that, but just a couple of brief examples. The brands are working together to collaborate where it makes sense with respect to products. So, for example, Rip Curl has a very large global T-shirt business. Rip Curl was collaborating with Kathmandu for the spring summer that we've just traded through in the Southern Hemisphere, and Rip Curl designed and developed a range of T-shirts that went to Kathmandu and really sold through very strongly through those Kathmandu stores, in really helping Kathmandu not only build its T-shirt business, but really help to appeal to that spring summer consumer who historically has been secondary to Kathmandu's focus on winter. Likewise, Kathmandu is certainly helping with Rip Curl's move into more winter weight products. And we've already launched last winter a range of insulation jackets with Rip Curl. So the brands are definitely collaborating with each other to drive greater 365-day relevance for those brands, leveraging Rip Curl's strength in summer weighted products and leveraging Kathmandu's winter weight strengths. So some good collaborations there. Outside of that, we're also looking on the back end of the business to really drive operational excellence by sharing on everything from our broader supplier base to warehousing and fulfillment. We've got 2 projects live at the moment. We're consolidating our warehouses in Canada so that our brands of Kathmandu and Oboz can distribute through the Rip Curl facility in Canada, and likewise doing a similar project in the UK and Europe at this point in time. So plenty of other examples on the back end of the business as well, where the brands are coming together to share on infrastructure and to share on some of those back-end functionalities, which we certainly think as we continue to realise that will drive really good margin and expense opportunities.
Let's move on to Kathmandu. And the business and the Kathmandu brand has been going through a product and brand refresh, clearly targeting sort of a slightly more vibrant, younger demographic without losing the core demographic that it's had as a customer for the number of years now. But the numbers seem to be hiding positive developments on the brand refresh and the product refresh program. I assume partly because of the issues of COVID and lockdowns and so on. How are you measuring this? How are you measuring the success of that refresh program, rejuvenation program, if you like, given that it's not easy to measure or just basis of sales because shops have been shut and travel's been curtailed?
Yeah, you're right. Look, we don't see the good work coming through in our numbers just yet, and some of that's a function of Q1 for the first half of Kathmandu very negatively impacted by store closures on the back of lockdowns. there were some weeks there in that first quarter we had 70% of the network down for Kathmandu, which really makes it hard to post good numbers, particularly given it was in months which is Kathmandu's biggest time of year. Kathmandu's biggest time of year is through the winter, as opposed to most retailers who have larger volumes through Christmas. So, but what we did see is when things were reopened in quarter two, we saw a really good bounce for Kathmandu and some good double-digit growth on the previous year as we were able to trade unrestricted in that period, and that's reflected in our quarter two results. So certainly that gives us confidence for the future. In terms of how we assess the, success of our rebrand, there's a couple of things there. Of course, like all brands, we monitor, how our brand is resonating through to the end consumer. We do that through consumer surveys, not only in store, but working with media monitoring agencies and brand monitoring agents, just to see where that resonance for that consumer sits. And all of our metrics there suggest that we're not only holding our market share, but our, the confidence or the brand appeal for our brand, for our younger consumer, is slowly starting to increase. So that's really good signs. But really, from my point of view, I judge it as much on just what I'm seeing in store, what I'm hearing from our own staff members, and what I'm seeing sell through in those times. And what we certainly saw for the spring-summer period in particular was a really strong sell-through rate on some of the newer products that are, bright, colourful, and really aimed at a younger consumer, particularly for that spring-summer season. So that definitely gives us a lot of confidence as we move into the autumn and the winter period, where equally we've still got those old favourites that people love, the Epic jacket, the Halley jacket. We've got a whole range of new products coming through, vibrant, a little bit younger, a little bit more fun, and very practical for use in the outdoors. And we think that will resonate really strongly with our consumer in Australia and New Zealand.
And Kathmandu has a well-known strong position in the Australian New Zealand market. Still early stages, obviously, but going back to the whole Rip Curl and Kathmandu working together, how's the expansion into international markets going, albeit still early stages, but how's it going relative to the early expectations you'd set for Kathmandu launching into new markets offshore?
Yeah, well, look, we're really excited by the opportunity. It's very rare you get a chance to take a brand that has such a market dominant position in one territory and take it into new territories where it doesn't necessarily have much of a presence. And so certainly that's what we're looking to do with the Kathmandu brand. We've targeted, or we've specifically called out Europe and Canada, where we're focusing our energies in the short to medium term. And certainly pleased to report that our initial work with releasing Kathmandu from a wholesale perspective for fall winter 2022. So that's products that we've already sold into retail partners or wholesale retail partners, and will ship in August of this year. That sell-through has already happened. We've taken the orders, and certainly our orders are well in excess of our initial first season targets. Now, of course, those numbers were pretty modestly set, obviously, given it was our first season, but we're definitely encouraged by the confidence that those retailers have in Europe and Canada to want to back the brand, wanting to see a new brand, particularly with that New Zealand background, which gives some, exotic feel to the European and the Canadian market, on top of Kathmandu's very strong sustainable messages. Certainly in our limited experience to date, it has resonated quite strongly. And the Kathmandu brand recently won Sustainable Innovation World Award at the 2022 Outdoor Retailer Awards, which is a big, a really amazing success and really well celebrated in the US market. And that certainly has driven some demand for our products in the Canadian market in particular, given the close proximity with Canada and USA.
You've talked about rejigging the Summit Club loyalty program, reinvigorating that, and also launching a Rip Curl loyalty program. Can you talk a little bit about how you're thinking about the two loyalty programs, and importantly, how you're looking to be innovative on the loyalty side, like you are on the product side, and it's not just you become a member and you get 5% off.
Yeah, look, it's another good example of where the brands are coming together to work together to leverage, I guess, operational efficiencies, but also just know-how. And Rip Curl historically has not had a loyalty program. Kathmandu has had a loyalty program in the form of Summit Club. So the first step that we've been working on is really getting Rip Curl up to speed and really working with Kathmandu and Rip Curl, leveraging Kathmandu's strength in this space to really fast track a new loyalty program for Rip Curl. And that will launch through the coming months in Australia and New Zealand. And we think that program for Rip Curl, which is Club Rip Curl, is very much going to be broader than just based on price or discount. You know, it's everything from experiences with some of Rip Curl's elite team. I think we've got a competition going on at the moment with pre-registration that if you win, you get to go surfing with Mick Fanning, which I'm sure a lot of people will be very pleased to do. But that's just a small example of some of the type of experiences we'll be looking to give as part of Club Rip Curl. But it goes more than that. It's broader access to exclusive products, early access to new products, and certainly rewarding the consumer through a reward system, a point system. You know, the more you spend, I guess the more you can earn. And so certainly that will be another key driver behind Club Rip Curl. And importantly, focusing on driving that increased frequency of consumers coming to Rip Curl in store and online. And with Kathmandu, we'll be looking to, I guess, see how the launch of the Club Rip Curl goes, see what works well, see what resonates with the consumer. And while Kathmandu is watching that, we will tweak behind the scenes the Summit Club and look to relaunch a revised Summit Club probably later this calendar year, which will take the very best parts of the things that we've learnt from the Club Rip Curl launch earlier this year. So we're definitely excited by the potential. And in doing that, we're all working off the same platforms, the same IT platforms, the same loyalty management systems. So from an operational point of view, it's as efficient as possible.
We might just touch on quickly on Oboz, because it is the third brand in the portfolio. And the recent results showed an unfortunate sort of speed bump in terms of disrupted supply. Can you sort of again talk to, was that Oboz specific or more industry specific, and what have you done to address that so the risk is lower going forward?
Yeah, a little bit like the Rip Curl wetsuit situation. The Oboz situation is very much industry-wide. Unfortunately, a lot of shoes of the world are made in Vietnam. And Vietnam, for those people who monitor the world news, would know that Vietnam went through a very significant wave of Delta outbreak in particular in that first quarter of this financial year. And with that, we saw our factories in Vietnam fully closed for 3 months. So that's 3 months where there's no production at all. And then it took them a good 3 months to build back up to more normal capacity levels. So really, Oboz has experienced in this financial year a good 6 months of disrupted or no supply of footwear, which is really disappointing. Prior to that situation, Oboz was probably the brand that had the most momentum and the most growth profile going for it. And I'm certainly expecting the 2022 financial year will just be a blip in the growth of Oboz. I expect as we move into FY23, and certainly as early as this second half, we'll see that growth continue to mount because we have a very solid wholesale order book. The demand for the product is very strong, particularly in the US market. And with that wholesale demand being so strong, as well as the potential that exists online, we're really confident for that future for Oboz. And, cross the fingers, so far so good on the supply chain. The factories are working quite well, and there's no signs that Omicron rollouts are going to have a negative impact on Vietnamese factories having to close. So all signs are good at this point in time.
How are you, given the challenges on the supply chain side, how are you thinking about inventory management? Is it a case of if you can get a product, just get as much of it as you can, or is it you'd much rather get an appropriate amount and run out so you don't have to go heavily discounting inventory to get rid of it? How are you thinking about inventory management across the brands, given you're also navigating quite challenging supply chain issues?
Yeah, look, the pandemic is just the gift that keeps on giving, and certainly the biggest challenge we have at the moment is certainly supply chain, and we're not alone in that being a key issue. And if I did have any hair left before the supply chain issues, I certainly don't have any left anymore. So it's one that it's a daily battle, to be honest, Ron, from everything from freight costs increasing to port congestion to factory closures. So it's a really challenging environment. The approach that we're taking with our inventory is, I guess, cautious optimism. You know, we think our brands are very well placed with a return to more normal activities, that we will see some good growth for each of our brands. That said, we're also very cautious because we know that if we do have a significant overbuy because we bring too much products in too early, that can have a really negative impact on our underlying margins as we look to channel through some of that product. So, yeah, really our approach to inventory management is some cautious optimism. We've brought forward some of our buys, we've changed some of our timelines just to make sure we've always got a steady flow of product. But I wouldn't say we're aggressively stockpile or anything like that. Our product tends to have a lower turn. We're turning our inventory more like 2 times as opposed to some of the fast fashion who might be 6 or more times. So with that, it gives us a natural, I guess, insulation to any short-term shocks. It's more of some of those longer shocks like we've seen in Neoprene and Oboz that have caught us out. And I don't think anyone can plan for sort of 3 to 6 month closures in factories at this point in time. So yeah, cautious optimism is where we're at. We're really comfortable at the moment with our inventory. Outside of those 2 areas we're flagged, we really have enough inventory to hit our numbers and to deliver some good growth. But we're cautious about that because we know even things like inflationary pressures and that, at some point in time they might bite into some consumer confidence. And so we're planning for moderate growth, not exponential growth, if that makes sense.
Yeah, look, I'm conscious of time. Probably time for 1 or 2 more questions, but a common theme coming out of the market at the moment is how companies are managing margins given cost inflation. Do you have an ability to raise price on products, and is that your only lever to address cost inflation?
Yeah, look, we definitely can increase prices, and indeed we already have in some circumstances, particularly for the US market with the inflation that market has seen for some time now. And the freight rates increasing on the back of port congestion, we've already passed on, unfortunately, to consumers some price rises, particularly in the heavier weight items like wetsuits and footwear, which attract a little bit more of that freight rates. But really for us, price rises are, I guess, a last resort. Obviously there is a point at which the consumer won't continue to pay that extra price. We're very conscious of that. We will pass on those price rises where it makes sense. And we find with some of those more technical items that people will pay that extra price, and it's not necessarily a key challenge. But in things like T-shirts or skirts or swimwear, there is a little bit more, it's a little harder to pass on the prices. So in those situations, we will more look to partner up with our long-term suppliers to share some of the increased costs and share some of the margin. Or what we can do, there's a lot of things we can do behind the scenes to detune some of the elements of the product, which are not going to negatively impact the overall quality, but it will bring down the costs. And that can be anything from reducing the amount of swing tags that we put with the product, reducing the number of trims that go with the product, going from a embroidered logo to an embossed logo, or another form of application of a logo. So there's quite a few things that we can do to change the nature of the product or the inputs to the product, which won't have a negative impact on the quality. So not substituting fabrics and so forth, but really around the trims and other embellishments to the product that, to be honest, most people would never even notice.
So we could keep talking, and we've unfortunately run out of time, Michael. We haven't even touched on the environmental sustainability side of things and the importance of that. But given you're nodding your head, obviously it's very clear it's a key part of what's important for the brand and what's important and what will help drive that growth as well. But look, I'm sorry we've run out of time. Thank you so much for participating at ConsumerOpps. Thank you for providing some really nice insight into the drivers of the growth that you've been achieving, and importantly, how the company is positioned to continue that growth trajectory going forward. KMD Brands speaks for itself in terms of the name and what you're all about, and looking forward to the continued delivery of new products, new markets, and further growth.
And leading in ESG, yeah, absolutely. Great, thanks very much, Ron. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks much.
Cheers. Bye.